Hey everybody, Dr. Snellgrove here, just recording a quick video for our most recent reading in Essentials of Technical Communication. And the reading is pretty straightforward. I think I may have accidentally started going into some of it, in our readings from last week because it follows so clearly. But yeah, this is starting on page 92. And I'll go ahead and confess to this. They used a term here that I was not familiar with. Use a ragged right margin. And I'm like, what is a ragged right margin? Is that kind of like a red right hand? It's not. And it turns out ragged right margin is just their term for not justifying the text. Now, in case you didn't do the reading or just don't know, justifying the text is a thing that it makes your text automatically aligned with the left and the right. It kind of stretches some of your text to the boundaries of the left and the right. It looks a little weird, in my always humble opinion, and spaced out. So what your book is saying is when you do justify a document, it's for certain kinds of very formal, very official documents. But most of the time, the kinds of stuff that you are putting together, including, I would say, for your presentation, your PowerPoints here, justifying it makes it look too formal, a little too stuffy. And by comparison, if you align the text to the left and not the right, makes it look a little friendlier, a little easier to read, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I will pause really quickly here and just say that for your PowerPoint presentation, I would encourage you to vary things up. Sometimes you've got the text is on the left, sometimes it's on the right. That's fine. Probably my most persistent commentary on your on your most recent PowerPoint slides was, hey, we need a little more visual variety here. You need to change things up. But this is more talking about writing a document. It could be something as simple as an email, or a proposal or something like that. It's like, all right, if you try to justify the text, frankly, it looks weird and off-putting. But if you left align it, looks friendly, easy, and approachable. All right, now here is another one that the rubber, I think, was kind of meeting the road on this for some of you while you're working on your PowerPoints. Position words and illustrations in a complementary relationship, which is just a fancy way of saying that they shouldn't get in each other's way, and in a perfect world, they'll actually enhance each other. So what does that mean? So for instance, I'm not trying to substitute anyone. This is just kind of off the top of my head. I had some folks where they would have a certain background, for the presentation, which is good. You want to have templates and backgrounds. You don't just want plain white, backgrounds. But then there will be something in the background image that makes it tough to read the text. I had folks that would have lines, their background would be alternating lines of different colors. And I was like, well, it looks pretty by itself, but as soon as you were having to put black text over dark green lines, it's like, oh, we just can't read that. And then sometimes I had folks that would have, it almost looked like they were going for a word bubble style approach. I'm going to put my text inside this, thing on here, but there would be a formatting error or something, the text was escaping the boundaries. And, long story, not very short, it just made it hard to read. So on the most basic level, you want to make sure that you're not doing that kind of thing. Your text isn't getting in the way, your images aren't getting in the way of your text, and your text isn't getting in the way of your images. But in a perfect world, and we could see a little bit of this maybe on page 93 as an example there, also of helping readers locate information. You see how the text and the one little image there kind of help each other out. They have a kind of diagram of, hey, this is what the safety closure does. Here's what the polarized plug blades do. And you got text around it. And it's like, oh, hey, it's the diagram is providing a literal illustration of what the text is talking about, all while they, don't step in each other's way. The diagram doesn't make it harder to read the text, and the text doesn't make it harder to read the diagram. In fact, they enhance each other. It's like, oh, picture, that's what he's talking about there. All right, now this leads into a pretty basic concept, but it does dominate the next few pages, helping readers locate information. So depending on how much of a creative person you are, or creative writer, if that's the right term for it, this can sometimes be a bitter pill to swallow. But most readers are not processing your information because they want to sit down and read, do a long read. They're not sitting down and reading your documents the way that you might sit down and read a short story or a good novel or something. And so what you want to do is basically whatever you can do. I'm not talking to you, watch. Whatever you can do to make it easier for your reader to understand stuff. And so they get into different methods here, which we're going to talk about. Number one with a bullet, this is on page 94, use frequent headings. That's the number one thing that we do as readers, whether you realize it consciously or not. If you click on a new document online, you are scanning through. If you're just handed pages, you're flipping through the pages. What are the different headers and subheaders, right? Because we understand on an almost elemental level, that's a great way to get a preview for what this is all about, for what this particular document is all about. So you want to have lots of headers. In fact, we've talked about this for your presentation. In fact, I'm kind of going back a little bit, but page 93 is an example of what I think we're talking about. There's lots of good headers there. Overheating or damage, prevent overloading, protect extension cords from damage. So you can see a lot of that text. You don't have to read all that note. You can read just 4 headers and you know what this document is going to be about. Now, I was going to say that I wouldn't put all of these obviously on a single PowerPoint slide, but page 93 does also do a good job of here's a header and here's a few bullet points of important info. And it's not the only way, obviously, to do PowerPoint slides, but it's a pretty powerful combo where you have header. We're going to talk more about good headers in a moment. You have a few key bullet points, and then maybe you have some imagery on there. All right. So now this one is, headers. It's one thing to say have a lot of headers in here, right? But it's another to be all right, these headers, need to be useful to the reader. And so they have this on page 94 where it's what should our, use descriptive headings, use concrete language, use questions, verb phrases, and sentences instead of nouns alone, use standard keywords, make headings parallel, make sure headings matching a list or table of contents in the document. All right. So I've actually gotten notes about this from my own editors in my writing career. So I was this definitely rings true. Generic headers don't really work. They call it out at the bottom of page 94 that if you have a header that's introduction, conclusion, or something like that, it's okay, we know a little bit about okay, you're introducing something or you're wrapping something up, but it would be far better if there was a concrete, description. That's right. So let's see. I think they get into some examples of this. Yeah, here we go. I'm kind of jumping ahead just a little bit because bottom of page 94, it talks about using questions, verb phrases, and sentences instead of nouns alone. This complements the concrete language discussion because they have an example of on page 97. Imagine that you had a header, e-scooter questionnaire completion. Okay, what is that about? Are you showing us how to complete the questionnaire? Are you showing us the completed questionnaires? Are you explaining what this questionnaire even is? It's not immediately clear. And what they say there at the top of page 97 is it would be much better if you had headers how do I complete the e-scooter questionnaire? Or what is the deadline for completing the e-scooter questionnaire? So it has a phrase or a question in this case, and the reader is scanning through, they want answers. So that's what I mean. All of this stacks together, right? Somebody is just quickly scanning through on the headers. They see a header with a very descriptive, what is the deadline for? It's all right, they're interested in reading that. And then you as the writer immediately provide the info that they need. Okay, and this isn't in the book, at least I don't think it is, but I wanted to throw this out here because, we're talking a lot about designing documents that might, for instance, end up on the internet. And so one of the things that's become really important in recent years are these kinds of question style headers. And the reason for that is something that's known as Google Snippets. I don't know if y'all are already familiar with this term, but Google Snippets is Google. You may have noticed this. sometimes you'll ask a question, you'll go to Google, you'll ask a question, and before it even gives you any websites, it'll spit out like, here's a fragment of something we found on this website that's probably the answer to your question. And so a lot of the people that are creating these websites and these articles for these websites, they compete for that kind of thing. So you want to have very specific questions as headers, followed by very specific answers to those questions, because if you're lucky, it's kind of like you leapfrog all the other sources, and somebody searching for that specific question will see your site and your writing before they see anyone else's. So just a little food for thought. I don't know how many of you are, currently do a lot of internet writing, or you have a lot of online writing in your future, but that's becoming an increasingly important factor. All right. So the other stuff here, use standard headings if readers expect them. Now, if readers expect them is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. So what they mean is, like, let's say you're doing a traditional like laboratory experiment report. And as you may or may not know from researching other papers, those are usually broken into sections like introduction, methods, results, analysis, and discussion. So if that's what the reader expects out of that kind of document, and you don't bring that kind of stuff, it actually makes you stand out in a bad way. All right. And then the last bit is pretty simple, but it can be a little weird. Well, it's actually not the last bit, it's the last bit on this page, but it's a pretty straightforward thing, but it can weird you out if you never had to study this in school. For instance, I made it through high school. My teachers never talked about parallel structure. It was public high school for you, man. But all right, so make the headings parallel. And so make the headings parallel is like, all right, I'm using the same general structure for the wording and phrasing. So like, if we're asking questions, we're having all of these be questions in this section. If we are ending things in ing for a verb phrase, we're doing that for all of them. So parallelism, this is kind of a basic explanation, but the way I always explain it to students is, imagine you ask somebody what their favorite hobbies are. And they're like, I enjoy playing football, playing basketball, and to play tennis. All right. You don't have to be a grammar nerd or an English professor. You immediately seize on to play tennis. That sounds weird. It does. It doesn't sound like all the rest of it. So AKA it doesn't have parallel structure. So we want to encourage you on the PowerPoint presentation and beyond, where you are looking at your document like, all right, are these things parallel? Am I asking these questions in the same kind of way? Am I setting, these sections up in the same like ing verb phrases or whatever? You just don't want it to stand out in a negative way. All right. Now, on page 98, like, this is not a thing I'm requiring you to do in your PowerPoint, but it's good to know. Make sure the headings match any list or table of contents in the document. So that's just a way of saying, like, the table of contents is there for a purpose. If you have stuff there that's not actually in your document, or vice versa, stuff in the document that's not in the table of contents, what are you doing? The table of contents is kind of useless at that point. All right. It talks about designing distinctive headings, and they give you an example on the top of page 99. And I'm personally not, well, it's not the worst headers in the world, but like you see controlling soil-borne pathogens, and that looks to be like a header 1. Types of soil-borne pathogens would be like header 2. And then soil-borne fungi, that's like a header 3. And so the idea is that this is distinct enough, you don't, there's no confusion before you start reading about what this is about, right? And it's also well organized in that nesting style where the header 1, the most important thing, the title usually. Header 2, these are your standard, headers. And then header 3 is like, all right, I've got a header 2 that sets up a list or something like types of soil-borne pathogens. Well, now I'm going to have a bunch of header 3s that are telling us about the different types of soil-borne pathogens. So again, you don't have to be like a grammar expert or a layout expert or anything, but that's just a logical way, because by the way, if your eyes are glazing over when I say like header 1, H1, header 2, H2, header 3, H3, it's like visually, as you might imagine, and as you can see on page 99, H1 is bigger than H2, H2 is bigger than H3, and so on. All right. Now they have some stuff here at the end that, like, if I'm being honest, I find this alternates between overkill and kind of like no duh. Because, for instance, on bottom page 99, it said limit the number of heading levels. So they say paper documents don't need more than 4 levels of headings. And then I honestly, digital documents don't need more than 2 levels of headings. So I would dispute that a little bit. I've had clients that insisted we need to break those H2s into smaller things, but they have a point here. Your reader, especially for online writing, only has so much patience, So if you have too many headers, it's like, oh, it's like Russian nesting dolls trying to get through here just to unpack your point. All right. But then they have stuff on page 100, like create a pattern for the headings and stick to it. But this is really just like the parallel structure we're talking about. You don't want to disrupt the pattern. You want this to be uniform. Match size to importance. And we talked about this a minute ago. Like, the reason the H1 is reserved for the title is that's the most important tag. The title is arguably the most important part of the document. Let's see. And so put more space above a heading than below it, for instance, is in here. That's a stylistic thing. Like, honestly, I would recommend you not have a whole bunch of space above or below your headers because it looks weird visually. But this is just saying here, like, if you absolutely have to, it's like, all right, there should be more space above a heading than below it, which is just a way of saying, like, reading between the lines, it's a little less disruptive that way. If you have space above a header, it's kind of like almost a dramatic pause before the next section. If you have a header and then space and then text, it looks like something got left off. Like, oh, did he mean to put an image there or something? Obviously, keep each heading with the section it covers. I really hope you definitely don't need to be doing this on your PowerPoint presentations, but it's just saying, like, the header tells us what the section's about. Therefore, the header and that section should be pretty damn close together, right? As opposed to, oh, here's the header at the bottom of slide 2, and then here's the rest of what it's talking about at the top of slide 3. It just looks sloppy. All right. And then to consider using numbers with your headers. Here's another one where I feel like I'm giving you all these qualified statements, but numbers with your headers in the way they describe on page 101, that is useful for certain kinds of textual documents. So you can imagine, like, header section 2 A3B or something. It's like, all right, let me thumb through here and get to that section. But when it comes to your online stuff or just presentations, whether they're online or offline, I would recommend not putting numbers with your headers unless you were just saying something like the first reason we should do something, the second reason. But this may be my own bias at play, but when I see stuff like section 2 A3B, section 437, section 6 823, it's like, oh, my eyes glaze over. I personally, I'm not really a numbers guy. Maybe a personal failing on my part. But yeah, I think that's about it for this week. A little longer than I anticipated, but hopefully it has been useful for you. Y'all know the drill. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to email me. Feel free to text me at 863-835-2399. You have a good one.